Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I'm so thrilled to be here today because I have a very special guest, someone who is incredibly inspiring to me and someone who is doing amazing work in the world, especially for the community of people who are survivors of human trafficking. We are going to welcome Lauren Trantham to the podcast. Lauren is the founder of Ride My Road. And in 2016, she set out on a 10,000-mile solo motorcycle journey across the United States. I'm not going to tell you too much more about this because I want to hear it in Lauren's own words. But she has this amazing organization called Ride My Road, and she does education and outreach and fundraising for survivors of human trafficking and to specifically help people who are allies and want to understand how to help. She has educational programs. One such is called Disruptors University. We'll talk about it more. But if you have been curious, if you have been wanting to learn about human trafficking, the truth about human trafficking and how you can help, you are going to want to visit ridemyroad.org so you can go learn all about it. So Lauren, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Erin. So nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. You are traveling right now, doing the good work, speaking on stages, sharing your story, and we really appreciate that you are taking some time out to chat with us today.
Well, thank you. It's my honor. I'm so inspired by you and your work and your journey, and just even listening to your most recent podcast, or I guess 2 podcasts ago, like really blew me away. And so I'm stoked to be here.
Oh, yay. Thank you. Well, I want to hear it in your words. How did Ride My Road start? What compelled you to get involved in this work? Give us a little bit of the story of the journey to hear.
Sure. My journey to launching this nonprofit and doing this project began with a journey through emotional abuse. I think that's why I was so moved by your story that you shared, because there's so many people who experience abuse and aren't talking about it. And there's so many of us who are struggling within cycles of abuse. And that's actually where I found myself. And like you, I had a lot of those same reservations when you were telling your story, but about that, like, how did I not see the signs? That really resonated with me, because I was married first. I was with my ex-husband for 7 years. And I didn't know it until it was over that I was actually living in emotional abuse, because I didn't know the signs. And so looking back, and you think, like, how could I have missed all those signs? Well, it's actually really common to miss all those signs. And so when I was in that experience, I knew I was miserable, but I didn't really understand what I was going through. And like I mentioned, until it was over. And when it was over, it was such a rock to my identity, because I just thought, how could that have happened to me? How could I have not seen those signs? And so I really launched this nonprofit as a personal project to try to understand how I felt in that cycle of abuse and how other people fall into cycles of abuse. And I really thought, if I can meet other people who have had experiences similar to mine, I wasn't trafficked and I was not physically abused, but I did have that emotional abuse element. And I thought, if I can meet people who have survived this, maybe they can teach me how to do it. And that was really the birth of this whole project, this whole nonprofit. And here we are almost 7 years later, and we're still at it.
I'm so grateful that you're sharing that. I was over here welling up and getting pretty emotional, because I think there are so many people out there that don't have a voice for what they've gone through. You know, it's obvious. I remember feeling that if I only had like the bruises and the scars to prove that I was abused. And it's so crazy, because in my situation, I was physically abused, but my abuser was smart about it and leave a lot of evidence. But for people who are emotionally abused, or financial abuse is a big one that happens for women, there's nothing, you don't have a badge that says, or a sign that says, I'm being abused. So you don't know, but also the world doesn't know. and it can feel so invisible. So I just really honor your bravery for sharing that with us. And I also honor the woman that was in an emotionally abusive relationship and what it might have been like for you to just realize that and come to terms with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important to remember too that physical abuse, it doesn't just happen right out of the gate. Emotional abuse is always a precursor to that. Because if you met somebody and you weren't emotionally sort of tied to them in any way, or they didn't have that connection with you and they just hit you, you probably would just leave. Right? Like right away. You'd just be like, what the heck? Like, that's not normal. But that's why emotional abuse is so closely linked to physical abuse and even human trafficking. It all fits under that umbrella. And so that's why I have such a heart for people, because I know how difficult just that first level of emotional abuse was. And it's hard to even put myself in other people's shoes of like what you experienced, right? Like you had that next level, and then people who are trafficked have that next level. And like you said, financial abuse is all so closely interrelated, and it all starts with that emotional abuse. And so it's so important to talk to people about this so that they can start to see like, oh, that's what it's like. That's why she doesn't leave. And then also, like you mentioned, those scars that you can't see, even after those bruises heal, that stuff doesn't leave you. I mean, you mentioned, I believe your story happened 20 years ago. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it doesn't just go away when the bruise heals. And so, yeah, I'm so glad that we're talking about this today.
And I just want to remind all the listeners, if you're listening right now and you're thinking, oh, am I in an abusive relationship? Follow that inquiry. If you're wondering, there's a high probability that yes. And I will put phone numbers in the show notes for helplines and resources for you. Just want to honor that if you're listening and this conversation is making you wonder about your own relationship. Lauren, what was the transition point for you that made you decide to leave?
Well, I feel really fortunate. It's kind of a weird thing to feel fortunate for, but I didn't leave. I actually got left. And I worry that if he was having an affair and I caught him. And even when I caught him in an affair, I was so tied to him. I remember telling him, like, don't do this to us. And I remember saying, I can forgive an affair. But he had sort of already made up his mind. And so he left. So I didn't even have that opportunity to like sort of stand up for myself and leave. And so I felt like I was in such a weak place, because I was like, here's this person who not only have they not been treating me well, now I'm just sort of like tossed out with the garbage. And that's where my identity crisis like really hit rock bottom. And I feel really lucky. Like, thank goodness he left, because I don't know that I ever would have, or how I would have had sort of the insight or the courage or all of those things to leave. So it's kind of interesting to think about that looking back. But I'm so grateful that it ended up that way.
Wow. Yeah. And that, I imagine that's a very different feeling than how you felt when he first left.
Yeah. And then when I went to counseling kind of right away, because I knew like something is not right. Like I had seen people go through divorces, and I just felt like this feels so much worse than that. And again, I keep bringing up identity, but that's because abusers strip you of who you are, and they sort of insidiously implant who they want you to be. And you create these behaviors and this personality to survive. And so when he left, my identity left with him. So when I went to a counselor and she started to explain to me what emotional abuse looked like, and when I started to come to the realization of like, ooh, this is exactly how I've been living, it was even, I feel like, harder, because I had been left by him. And I just kept thinking like, he's not even a good person, and he didn't choose me. So there was a lot. I mean, it took me years to get over that. Wow. Like still not feeling worthy of him. And even though like he was so horrible to me, it's like just you're so tied, I mean, I think now I would call it even trauma bonding, which is the terminology for that. But it just totally rocked me.
Right. And have you explored the idea of the different attachment styles?
Oh, I've been researching that a lot, but I haven't thought about that as it related to that relationship.
It just made me think of it because when a relationship ends and we feel that feeling of like my life is completely over, I can't breathe without this person, it is actually a sign of kind of this dysfunctional attachment style. And I find it really helpful to learn about our attachment styles. It is helpful to me in my current healthy relationship, because part of the reprogramming for me is to learn how to be in healthy relationship and to recognize when my attachment style is triggered and what's triggering it, and really the underlying cause of that. So I'll put a link in the show notes about attachment styles, but it pinged for me when you expressed how destroyed you felt when he left.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the attachment styles has become more important to me now as I move forward and look for healthy relationships, because I don't want to fall in that like deep dark hole I was in, to put it lightly. But the way that I think about that relationship, maybe a little bit differently than even attachment styles, is just that he was a narcissistic abuser. And of course, he hasn't been diagnosed as that, but between me and my counselors and the people who have been along this journey with me, that's what I would, in my non-professional opinion, diagnose him as a narcissistic abuser. And I think narcissistic abusers target very empathetic people. And so that's when instead of attachment styles with that relationship, I sort of think of that dynamic. Because empathetic people like you, Erin, like we are very quick to forgive and see the best in people. And we're also really good at sort of minimizing our needs, because when he was in turmoil, I felt that. And I had so much empathy for him. I would let him, like, for better terms, like get away with crazy stuff, because I felt like, but I know his heart. And so that's kind of the dynamic, is I think narcissistic abusers target people like that, because if you're not empathetic, like so deeply that it's detrimental to yourself, you would just tell them to take a hike, right? You would have maybe a bit stronger boundaries. And so that's something that I always think about.
Right. Yeah. This is why I love working with sensitive women, because I have learned through my life that there's things I can do to keep my empathetic, sensitive heart and protect myself. And it just is way more boundaries than I ever knew I needed as a young woman.
Isn't that an incredible journey?
It is. And how do we teach our young girls this? As I'm raising two daughters, how do I teach my girls to keep that sensitive, kind heart and have these rock solid boundaries so that they can move through the world?
Yeah. What a journey.
So you came out of this relationship, and at the time, I knew you during this time. You were a photographer. And how did you find this project where you got on your motorcycle and went 10,000 miles and took pictures of survivors of human trafficking? How did that come to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think at its core, that journey for me was such a cry for help. And I really felt like I had sort of believed like everything happens for a reason, that like, but at the same time, I didn't really believe that everything happens for a reason. But what I knew was that I had to make meaning out of it. I had to make it mean something, or I felt like I couldn't continue in life. Like I just didn't know how to face the world knowing that these things happen to people. And so it was like my way of meaning making. I had to figure out like if everything happens for a reason or doesn't happen for a reason, like that's sort of up to us. And so that like at the core, I think like looking back, that's what happened. I just really could not stand the thought that this just happened to me and like, so what? And so I thought I have to make this mean something. And even though I didn't have those words for it at the time, I just started to think like, what can I do with this? How can I help myself? I was in such crisis. And so that's what I mean when I say it was like a cry for help. I was like, I have to find something, and I had to rebuild my identity. And I had already, like you mentioned, I had already been a professional photographer, and I had already been riding motorcycles for a long time. And so I just thought, oh, what if I can combine the two? And so, yeah, that's how it happened. So I did go on the road, and sort of what I mentioned before, how can I find people that have experienced abuse? How can I learn from how they healed? And then maybe I can heal. So it was sort of like, it was like, just like not necessarily so altruistic, like, oh, I'm going to go help people and whatever. It was really like, I'm struggling. How can I get out of this? And it just so happened to come together. It was like, almost like it wasn't to be, it did happen for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that mindset is one of the core healing tools for me. Whether or not it's really true, because I still sometimes struggle with the idea of a higher power or divine direction. I can still have thoughts where I feel like this is all just meaningless. But I sink into the belief that there is a divine plan. I do have a higher power, and everything that I've been through in life is for a reason, and that the wisdom I have gained on the other side is such a gift, and that absolutely I have to do something with it. So whether or not that's true, that's a survival tool for me. And I think a lot of people that we see in the world who have this incredible wisdom and are such a light, and you just sit with them and you're like soaking up everything they have to offer. I bet you most of those people have a story of abuse or trauma or some hard time they went through.
Mm.
And there is a gift in it if you're willing to do the work to heal, and you're willing to follow those breadcrumbs of like, okay, what am I going to do now with my story, and what am I going to do with my experience? And pouring yourself into helping someone else, I think, is a wonderful way to heal.
Mm. Yeah, I love how you put that. It's such a tricky balance for me, even in my mind when I'm explaining it, because if you get into that, if you get into the nuance of like everything happens for a reason, and then I'm out in the world and I'm meeting these survivors of human trafficking, like, were they trafficked for a reason? It's like, no, like that should never happen to anybody. So finding that sort of like individual relationship with what you went through and how you overcome it, and can I make it mean something, like it's so hard. It's so nuanced.
It's true. It's true. So you went on the road and you met all these survivors, and at some point you decided to start a nonprofit, Ride My Road. Was that obvious right away, or how did that happen? Because that's a small undertaking.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. No, it wasn't obvious right off the bat. Like I really was. So when I like the timeline of it, when I went through my husband's phone and found out about this other woman, it was almost December of 2015. By September of 2016, I was on the road. So it was a very quick transition. And I hadn't really thought, like, because I told you I was in crisis, and I was like, I have to do something, and I have to do it right now, or I'm not gonna be able to get out of bed. And so at the time, I never imagined that this would become my entire life. I just thought that I would do this one thing, and it would, I would see. I didn't even think like, I'll see where it takes me. I really just thought it will be this one thing. It will be this personal photography project, and maybe I'll have some photos afterwards. But when I came home from that trip, I was on the road for 8 weeks. So 2 months, I did the 10,000 miles. I photographed almost 40 survivors across the country. And we raised almost $60,000 for the organization that I was partnering with. And when I came home from that trip, people kept wanting me to speak, and people kept wanting to donate. And so it was at that point when I was like, wow, this thing has legs. Like, we were getting so much support and media and just people interested and survivors reaching out for photo shoots. And so at that point, it was like, man, maybe I should give this a go. And that's kind of like one side of the coin. The other side is like, once I met these survivors and once I really learned about how prolific human trafficking is in the United States, I just couldn't let it go. Yeah. So here we are, like I said, 7 years later, and it's my full-time job, and I'm involved in all of these different organizations and programs. And I'm still riding my bike. I'm still photographing survivors. It's just been an insane, incredible journey that I never could have dreamed.
I felt absolutely the same way when I learned about human trafficking. You can't turn your back to it once you learn about it.
Yeah, because it's so linked with those cycles of abuse that we were talking about earlier. And it happens in every city in the United States. It's a $1 billion industry in our country. People don't understand exactly how it happens. But if everybody understood how prolific it was, I think it would just blow people's minds. And once you know it, it's like, I see it everywhere. I can't let it go.
So what is your advice to someone? I'm thinking about a few different types of people. One person that comes to mind often is a mom who learns about human trafficking and goes, what do I do to protect my kids?
Yeah, I think that's great. First of all, I would say the first step is to commit to more education. So it's one thing to like hear it for the first time and be completely shocked about it, but we have to go sort of and explore the layers beneath the shock and start to really understand root causes. And it's everything from, it's an intersection of racism and poverty and economic disempowerment. And there's a lot of ways that it happens. There's a lot of ways we can tackle this issue. So I would say the first step is to really commit to the learning, getting educated on what is really happening, because it's not just kidnapped kids in cages. And if we keep sort of thinking of that and relying on the shock of that to raise awareness, we're really kind of missing a lot of the ways that we can make an impact. That would be my first step.
And you give excellent education through Disruptors University, which you can find all that information on ridemyroad.org. If you want to learn, I would highly recommend you go through Disruptors University. Is there any other place you recommend people go to start learning?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great start. I launched that university during the pandemic as it was sort of our response to, everything shutting down and not being able to hold the sort of community event that we had been holding. But I also launched that university in response to having, at that point, like 5 years working in this industry and understanding sort of that we can raise awareness all day, but like I said, if we don't understand how it really happens, we can't really make an impact. And so for that university, we bring in the top leaders from across the anti-trafficking movement to teach all different facets of the movement. And it's everything from like, where are you shopping? Where are you getting those toys for your kids? I think if we really sat down and looked at supply chains and we thought like, wow, I'm buying my kid this toy that's being made by another kid in another country who's been exploited, like we have a lot of power with our our purchasing power goes a long way. And so that's kind of what we want to do in the university, is really move from that awareness to that education for people like moms and teachers and dads and everyday people.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Oh, but to answer your real question, yes. And so because we bring on a lot of survivor leaders to teach those classes, they also offer a wide variety of resources and their authors and their professional public speakers, and they have their own websites and their own trainings. And so once you get enrolled into Disruptors University, like the resources just kind of explode. There's so many places to go and learn.
That's great. And something you taught me, which I think is so important, is to listen to survivors. So instead of just watching any old YouTube video or documentary, you really have to ask, who is the expert here? And if it's somebody that was not actually a survivor, there can be helpful people, but I would question if that's the source I want to go to. Can you speak to that at all?
I would agree with you. I mean, I think, I want to say that the movement, the anti-human trafficking movement, is fairly new. I mean, it wasn't even technically illegal as we outline it today until the year 2000. And so since the 80s, the 90s, and then moving now into the years that we're in, the concepts and the training have changed so much. And what we're really doing is moving towards survivor leadership and really listening to the people who not only were they just trafficked, but that they've gone on to get education and work in policy and become lawyers and authors. And they've really done a lot of deep work to become experts at trafficking. And they have this other, they have this other element of having lived experience. And so that's who we always look to. And you can kind of tell when, a good way to tell if an organization is sort of survivor informed or survivor led is to really look at kind of what are the things that they're promoting. And if they are just promoting sort of the kidnapped kids in cages and the rescue terminology, I tend to assume like they're probably not very survivor informed. And so there's a lot of things that you can learn about, like, where are you getting your information from, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So the other person that comes to mind is a young adult. I know myself, when I was a young adult, figuring out how to make money was really stressful. And at that time, our society did teach, find a man and he'll take care of you. Mm-hmm. Like, all you have to do is marry rich. And I feel, at least with my own daughters, and I'm very curious what you would say, what can we give our young people so that they feel economically empowered, would be the other person that comes to mind when I think about who wants this education. So with my girls, the things I'm thinking about is really being aware of not teaching that idea that they have to find another person to support them, and instead teach them about their own income generating abilities. This is why I love entrepreneurship so much. Budgeting, investing, education, like really changing that script. It wasn't even that long ago, right, that women would go to college so that they could find a husband. And I would argue that that's a very thin line between the sex trafficking that we might be talking about and a woman who finds a husband to support her financially, which could easily turn into financial abuse. So what are your thoughts around a young person who is trying to figure out how to support themselves economically, to avoid a situation where they become subject to the potential of trafficking?
Yeah, and this is an incredible question. I think it's currently also really difficult because we have a lot of things like OnlyFans and sugar daddy websites that are promoting the opposite of what you're talking about, where it's easy to just make thousands of dollars and using your body or using images and sort of customized pornography that is the platform of OnlyFans. And so it's like, how do we combat? And I think you bring up excellent points, Erin. Like, you have to teach, first of all, be talking about online exploitation with your kiddos. Really sit down with them and have a frank conversation about what it means to upload your nudes online. I mean, the statistics of kids uploading nudes right now is astonishing, and it's happening as young as 9 years old. So, I mean, I guess I'm going to back up. One of the best ways to keep the kids protected right now is to not be giving them devices. 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds should not be having devices. There's people there that are exploiting that very specific age group, and they're being exposed to pornography and sexploitation and what we call self-generated sexual abuse material. which is when a child uploads a picture of themselves and they're underage. That's like one of the fastest growing crimes in the United States right now. So first step would be to keep devices away from the kiddos. They don't need those devices at that age. And even the Attorney General said 13 is too young. So we have to be considering that. And then in place of that, be instilling different types of self-worth, like getting your self-worth through different types of accomplishments and personality traits. And I think it's all of the things that you're doing with your girls is really inspirational to see, because I know specifically the financial abuse is something that you'll probably be talking more about, but just remind people that they can use, children, that they can use their brains. They don't have to use their bodies, and showing them and giving them examples of how to do that early on, I think is really powerful.
Oh, this is all so good. We could probably talk for hours. I feel such a heart for this subject, and I really appreciate your time. I would love to transition into the event that we have coming up and the fundraiser that we have coming up.
Yes. Well, I don't think we mentioned Aaron, but Aaron sits on the board of Ride My Road.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah, we didn't mention it, but I asked Aaron to join our board of directors for this anti-trafficking nonprofit, because I know Aaron has such a heart for this issue, and also just her business expertise. She's been lending very valuable information and resources to us so that we can continue to grow this org from an entrepreneur standpoint, which is so important. So first, I just want to thank you for that, Aaron. And Aaron is helping us get ready for this local event that we're doing in Medford, Oregon on May 20th. It's called the Day of Disruption, and it kind of goes in line with our Disruptors University, that we can teach people how to disrupt this issue. So disruption is our word. So for the Day of Disruption, we'll be meeting on May 20th at Roxy Ann Winery from noon to 3 p.m. We're going to have live music, including the Danielle Kelly Trio, and then a special performance by Aaron's husband, Gabe Fugate, the inspirational rapper. He wrote an amazing song for survivors, and I can't wait for him to perform it. And we'll be raising funds so that we can continue to educate communities and support survivors.
It's so good. So if you're in Southern Oregon, come out. If you're not in Southern Oregon, we have another cool aspect to this event, which is we applied for a doTERRA Healing Hands matching grant, and we got approved. This is actually our second matching grant from doTERRA. What that means is every donation we get towards this fundraiser, so your ticket to the event, if you come to the event, but also you can go to Ride My Road / where are you putting it? /
Events.
And if you're not local or you can't come to the event, you can donate to the fundraiser, and your donation will be matched by doTERRA Healing Hands. So I'm so grateful for that. Thank you, doTERRA.
Amazing. I'm still in awe at everything that the Healing Hands Foundation does. Just blows me away.
Blows me away too. And I wanted to mention it because if you're listening and you're inspired by Lauren's story, and you want to go be of service, you want to be a helper, you can, of course, there's so many things you can do. But what I want you to know is, if you are a doTERRA customer, even if you're not a doTERRA customer, but listening to this podcast, you probably have purchased essential oils from me at some point, or you're involved in some way, you can actually apply for a matching grant. All you need is your favorite nonprofit doing good work that you can get behind, and a willingness to fundraise. And you can set out for a goal with that nonprofit and ask Healing Hands to give you a matching grant. And we've gotten approved twice. So reach out to me. I'd love to help you with that. It's such a beautiful offering, because I know so many of us do want to help, and we may not know how to start our own nonprofit, or maybe that's not something we want to invest our time with, but we would love to raise funds for our favorite nonprofit. So I'll put a link about all of that in the show notes as well.
Incredible.
Lauren, as as we close, you're welcome. You're so welcome. It's my pleasure. I pinch myself that this is what I get to do for my life and my work. So as we're closing this episode, do you have any final words for the listeners? Anything that you'd like to wrap us up with?
Well, I think, what you were talking about earlier, what do you do if you find yourself and you're thinking like, am I in an emotion or am I in an abusive relationship and you don't quite know how to answer? There are some resources that I want to plug. First of all is the book Codependency No More by Melanie Beal. That book helped me so much when I talk about that dynamic of narcissistic abuser and empath. There was a lot of codependency happening. And that's why when he would get upset, I would feel upset, even though it wasn't my issue. So breaking that codependent cycle is a great place to start. And then the second book, which was the book that most changed my life. And I will admit it was very difficult to read because of how I had been living. And it's Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men. And it's written by Lundy Bancroft. And that book, I actually recommend all women read that book, or even all people read that book, because it's going to give insight to how these abusive relationships play out, so that even if we're not living in that experience, we will be quicker at identifying if one of our family members or our daughter or our sisters, or if another person in our life that is experiencing that, it's going to give us the tools to identify that. And so my wish for everybody is that they read Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft.
Oh, great. I will put those resources in the show notes. And I completely agree, because as you heard in my last episode, the red flags for me were missed. And now I know, and now I can teach my kids that there are red flags 100%. And when we can be fortified against those and recognize them, I think we can avoid some of these situations.
Definitely.
Oh, well, I'm so excited for our event. I can't wait to be there together and raise the money and build the awareness with everyone. And I'm so grateful to you, just that you exist in this world and that you followed the path to find your purpose, and that we were able to meet and we can do this good work together. So thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Erin. I cherish you and I cherish the work that you're doing. You're making the world a better place for so many people. I so appreciate you.
Oh, okay. Well, bye, everybody. Have a great day.